because I love this old saying of like, you can sometimes either be right or you can be loved.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Basically Doctors. So today, Anna and I want to have a conversation about conflict resolution. And we have a lot of experience with conflict resolution because she and I got into a huge fight in graduate school.
We love to fight. We're experts in fighting.
We fight all the time.
And sometimes we're even good at resolving said fights. So
yes,
there are lots that we have to say. Yeah, I think, let's give our experience. I think to summarize, Nina and I were best friends since the first year of graduate school. We got into a huge fight in our fourth year, which led to us not being friends for basically, a little more than a year. And we still had to work together and find a way to work together around that conflict. So those are our credentials.
And to really paint the picture of how much we had to work together, we sat right next to each other in lab. We were on the executive committee of the Chemistry Graduate Student Association. We taught together for 2 quarters, and we were working on a book chapter together that we had to literally work as a team to finish.
So we know a lot about conflict, and we know a lot, I think, about dealing with conflict in a work kind of semi-professional setting, if we can call grad school that. And we're probably not going to focus too much, I think, on our fight and how we resolved our fight specifically. But I think a good way to approach this conversation is just, I spoke about this with you earlier. There's really 2 main reasons why people get into conflict, right? At anywhere, grad school, life, whatever. I think the first reason, which you have a lot of experience in, is the fact that there's just misunderstandings. Misunderstandings come up when you're conversing with other people, and sometimes that will result in conflict. And I think the second reason why we get into conflict as individuals is just because we fundamentally have different perspectives or we just disagree. 2 people can just disagree about any one thing, and then that can cause conflict. I feel like I think a good way to structure this episode is just to talk about those 2 main sources of conflict. So let's start with the first one, misunderstandings. Misunderstanding.
Yes.
How do you feel do you feel misunderstood in life?
I actually don't usually feel that misunderstood.
I do all the time.
I know you are always feeling misunderstood. I sometimes feel misunderstood. You know what? Actually, I take it back. I do feel really misunderstood, and I feel misunderstood because of the way that I approach conflict, actually, which I think is really funny. It's not just the way that I approach conflicts, but it actually has to do with the way that I interact with people typically. I have strong opinions, and I have no problem sharing those opinions, usually. Okay. There's times where I will hold my opinion back, but when I have a feeling, I will share it with people. And as a result, sometimes people think that I believe that it's my way or the highway, but that's actually not true. That's how I think I'm misunderstood. And that can lead to misunderstandings that can ultimately lead to conflict. Because what we talked about in the QE episode is that I always like to crowdsource. So I like to talk to a bunch of different people about how to do things, and then I will do my own research to figure out what I think the best way is. And then what I'll usually do is present that best way, and I'll be very passionate about that best way. Okay. And then people take that passion as a need for it to, come to fruition, which is actually not the case, because I actually prefer peace over things going my way, which is how I'm misunderstood.
Yeah, I would think, a general misconception about Nina, I feel like I can speak to, is that she is a dictator and that she won't listen to alternative ideas. And that's not my own experience working with her. That is not the case. She's very willing to listen to other people's ideas, but a lot like me, you have to be kind of loud about them. You know what I'm saying? Like, you have to be just as loud about your ideas as she is about hers, and I think we both are this way. This is why we, generally speaking, I think don't have that much conflict, because we are both very forthcoming about how we feel, and that facilitates our communication. But if you don't match Nina in her loudness and intensity, I feel like sometimes that leads to misunderstandings that leads to a breakdown in communication, rather, which will ultimately lead to a conflict. Because communicating effectively is, I think we both agree, the foundation to all of our interactions and the key to resolving conflict.
Yeah, I think that that's definitely fair about me. If somebody is coming at something harder than I am, I will defer, actually, because it's only when I really care about something that I'm like, okay, I really think we should do it this way. And this is why I think that. And I really stand behind it. But if I actually don't care or someone cares more than I do, I will be like, let's do it your way. I'm by all means, like, I don't need to be right here. It's not my monkeys right now. This is your monkey. And that's fine with me. So that's part of how I can resolve conflict too, is like knowing when I want to take a stand versus when I don't want to take a stand, like picking your battles, if you will.
Yeah, I think picking your battles is incredibly important. It comes into play, I think, in both conflicts, either being right or like either believing that, two people believing that they're both right, or if there is a misunderstanding, like understanding when and where to fight about something is always going to be key to conflict resolution, because context is everything. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people, like a conflict that can be resolved amongst two people is not going to be resolved if it's brought up in a group, so that's actually also something that is important to keep in mind. And we'll probably talk about that more when we go into kind of like two people being right or wrong. I think the misunderstandings thing is an easy one if you can recognize it. The key is because recognizing it is the hardest part about misunderstanding conflicts. Because the resolution is actually quite simple. If you have a misunderstanding with somebody, usually you can resolve that like through communication. Just being like, this is where I'm coming from. Where are you coming from? Like, that's pretty simple. But I think it's hard to recognize when there is a misunderstanding happening, because people usually are really prone to making assumptions. And assumptions are not fact. And something I really like to say is that you need to be really clear when you have big feelings about something, when you're in a conflict, what is an assumption that you're making and what is something that's actually happening, because the assumption's not always reality. If you find that you're making a bunch of assumptions in something, that's when you should be keyed into, maybe maybe there's a misunderstanding here because I'm making certain assumptions and I should clear those assumptions up with that other person, and then utilize that to initiate a conversation with somebody else, right? To talk about it.
It's like that saying that there's three sides to every story. There's one person's side, the other side, and then there's the truth. And usually the truth lies in the middle, right?
Absolutely.
And I think the other thing with misunderstandings, like as you may have noticed, I love to read books and I like to read self-help books. And one of those books that I read that actually my PhD advisor recommended is called Getting to Yes. And it's about negotiation. And in the beginning of the book, the first chapter is basically focused on the fact that conflict is actually important for growth. And even further, that if you're going to go into a negotiation or you're having a conflict with somebody, you always have to remember that on the other side of that table is another human with ideas, with their own values and beliefs, and that you need to put yourself in their shoes in order to come to a good resolution. And so that kind of goes to what you're saying. If you're having a misunderstanding, you should really think about, well, how might this other person actually be feeling right now? I know how I'm feeling. Maybe I'm having these big feelings, but what big feelings might this other person be having as well? And it just makes it a lot easier to deal with conflict that way. So I actually haven't finished the book, but I'm halfway through it. So I'll let you know how it is, but I'll link it down below because I like the first half so far.
We love it when Nina has self-help books to share. I think that's a really big value that you add to this podcast. And I hope other people feel the same way.
Dude, I don't think anyone likes self-help books as much as I do.
No, but I feel like there has to be an audience. Like, it's certainly not me. Couldn't be me.
No, it's not you at all.
But I'm glad that you're speaking it to the kiddies. You're letting everybody know. But I think, okay, so I feel the same way about misunderstandings. I think that ultimately I come off very loud. And so as a result, other people think that I have a very firm stance on something. When in reality, arguing to me, as we've previously discussed, is just another vehicle of understanding other people. Like, I prefer to interact with people through arguments, especially when it's about science, because I think that the back and forth is what gets us closer to the truth. If we were all just in our little like boxes and thinking our own unilateral point of view, like that's only one perspective, right? But when we're like pitting our perspectives against somebody else's perspectives, that's when I feel like we can really learn something and get something to grow out of it, So that in some ways, I agree with you. Conflict is sometimes good. And sometimes, like it's through conflict that you two either grow as people or that you find the truth, like that you get closer and closer to what's actually reality. And if you're interested in that, then that's like practicing conflict in healthy, professional ways or respectful ways, rather. If we're talking more personal life, that can be a really good thing for two people.
I agree. And I think something that we've talked about before is that when you're having conflicts with people, you also have to remember not only are they human, but they also have their own experiences that lead them to react to conflict in different ways. And that was something very interesting about Anna and my relationship, because I am not conflict averse. I don't really leave conflicts feeling bad because I always think that conflict is good. And I think that conflict leads to growth. And I don't think that conflict needs to have this negative connotation. But Anna hates conflict. Do you want to share about that?
I was thinking about this, and actually, I love conflict when it's in the scientific research setting, because that's how I approach problem solving, and that's how I approach my research. It's like this kind of like battle of like our two ideas, and that's what we talked about in our QE preparation episode as well. It's just like, me sparring with somebody about science I love that. I lean into it. I came across as kind of an asshole my first year because of it, though. Talk about misunderstandings, because I felt I was so hungry to learn and hungry to get more information and to advance as a researcher that sometimes I would get into arguments with other students about homework or about problem sets. And that's just a bad introduction. That's a bad first impression to give people, because then other people think, oh, you're a know-it-all, or you are egotistical, or you're really arrogant and, you're hard to work with. In reality, I think I just came from a place of I haven't talked about science with other people in such a long time at my level. This is grad school is the first time to do it. I was just an eager beaver.
See, I felt like first year, it wasn't that I didn't think you were arrogant. I just thought you were really competitive, and that you were really hungry. And you were arguing all the time with everybody. But I felt I was like, damn, this girl really, she's really competitive. So I felt like we were battling each other on some level.
I think sometimes that can come off as really uncool, though, to other people.
Oh, yeah, no, for sure. It's 100%. I'm sorry.
It's kind of giving Rachel Berry from Glee, Leah Michelle in real life, that kind of overachiever. It's annoying. It's annoying. You know what I'm saying?
I never watched Glee.
That's okay. Who knows if that reference will hit people?
It's Christina Yang.
Yeah, it is Christina Yang. It's giving, I can't, and this is why we draw that parallel of Grey's Anatomy, you being Meredith and me being Christina, even though we've kind of I feel like every now and then we flip, but depending on where we are emotionally. But Christina Yang energy, overachiever, which I think can come across as uncool and alienates your classmates, certainly in your first year, by the way, if you're like that. When other people are competitive, I actually don't think lesser of them. Usually, I can find it, I actually really respect it. Even if it's annoying, I really respect it, because I like anybody who really wants to learn. I like anybody. Yeah. And that's one of the first things that I noticed about you, Nina, is that I saw that hunger in you too. And I like that about you. Whereas other people looking at me think I'm an asshole or think this is the most annoying thing to be around. And I get that. But I don't fault others for wanting to better themselves. Because what are we doing grad school for if not to better ourselves? What are we doing here?
I think for me, you were just so confident. So I was like, okay, who is this girl? Just kidding. Anyway, back to the point. So misunderstood. We both have felt misunderstood. Yes.
Yeah. And I think that one's a fairly easy one to cover, because again, we can communicate and talk it out with people usually in order to get over this misunderstandings. And that also kind of has to do with giving the other person the benefit of the doubt, which I feel like you've brought up many times. It's kind of you need to, if you can recognize that there's a misunderstanding, that means you're capable of thinking, oh, maybe there's something this other person hasn't shared with me about the situation that I have not understood, and I should seek out that information. It's about being proactive enough when you're in conflict and it's a misunderstanding to go, let me not wait for the other person to talk to you, but sometimes to go and be like, hey, is there something I'm not getting here?
Well, I think what you'll see us talk about this entire episode is that communication is key to resolving conflicts, because like we said, so many of them are just misunderstandings. And I think a lot of times people will let things fester. And when you let things fester, like you get to a point where this person who's been bothering you, like everything that they do bothers you. When if you had just talked to them a couple months ago or a couple weeks ago, you probably wouldn't have gotten to that point.
Something that we talk about a lot too is just the fact that conflicts don't just happen because of one misunderstanding. It's usually like if you get into a big fight with somebody, it's probably been a long time coming, and maybe there are multiple, like it started out with one misunderstanding that kind of grew over time because it was always an unresolved misunderstanding. And what I really like about Nina's conflict resolution is that she usually will try to nip misunderstandings at the bud and try to resolve conflicts like when they're small so that they don't grow into really big fights.
Definitely. That happened in my postdoc. I had a one situation that, I mean, it wasn't a big deal because it was with a friend, but we were arguing about something scientific and I could tell that they were getting annoyed and we were both just kept kind of discussing it. And then at some point we just let it go. But the next day I went up to him and I was like, hey, I'm really sorry that like I kept pushing that conversation because, I could tell that you didn't want to have that conversation. And he was like, wow, like, thank you. That was very introspective of you. I was like, thanks. I try. I really try.
See, that's like a very like adult. That's like such adult behavior. I love that. I think that's great.
Yeah, that's what I try to do, right? I always try to nip things in the bud. The other conflict, like I feel like I've had a couple conflict. I mean, we've all had conflicts, but ones that I like really remember other than our fight was the other one that you were there for too, was with one of our colleagues in grad school where there was kind of like a little blow up in lab. And Anna, who is the ultimate mediator, was like, okay, everybody, let's all take a minute. Let's all chill out. And I was like, okay, for sure. And then I went up to the other person of the blow up and I was like, we need to talk about this. Let's go get coffee or something. And so like we went downstairs and we talked for 45 minutes. And it was just a series of misunderstandings and assumptions that were made between both of us that we talked through. And we both decided like, okay, obviously we've had some misunderstandings. We've made some assumptions about each other. Let's just start over. Let's just blank slate. And we like, I don't know if we pinky promised or shook hands or something. I don't know what we did, but we were like, okay, blank slate. And like, and from the next couple days that we would, every time we saw each other, we'd be like, blank slate. Like, and then, but now he's like one of my best friends. So we got that blank slate and moved on from the conflict. And that was a big conflict. And that one had been brewing actually too. So I don't know.
It was definitely brewing because part of the reason why I mediated was because in lab, it was like if two people are like saying things to each other that I knew you guys needed to take a lap because I was like, if this keeps going, you guys are going to say something to each other that you guys can't take back. And that's going to be really rough to come back from, And that's the main, going back to what you were saying, like, I'm sorry, I kind of went off on a tangent of like how I was perceived in my first year, but in terms of like whether or not I'm avoiding confrontation or asking for it, like I'm very good about conflict when it's research related. That's why I was an eager beaver when we were in classes, because it was very like education related, science related. I felt really comfortable with that. But where I shy away a lot is when the conflict is interpersonal, when the conflict has to do with life, essentially anything outside of work, outside of research, outside of like what we're studying. I really shy away from conflict because I don't think feelings can be hurt as easily when it's science or when we're talking about a theory or when we're talking about a hypothesis. That is like a very empirical subject. But when it's about interpersonal stuff, then feelings get hurt. And feelings getting hurt scares me because I feel like this is how I feel. I don't need to be right if somebody's feelings are going to get hurt, and because I love this old saying of like, you can sometimes either be right or you can be loved. And sometimes you don't get to be both. So like that's why it's so important to me that when people argue that they don't hurt each other's feelings. And I felt like you and this other graduate student were getting to a point where feelings were going to get hurt. And I was like, no.
Yeah, this is not good. No, that's right. And I think that is such a good saying too. It's so important for not just like romantic relationships, but also friendships, coworkers. Like, you don't always have to be right. And I also think like being in a graduate student environment, you're with a lot of very smart people, a lot of people who are used to being right. And so when you have this pressure cooker of not only people who are sad graduate students, but also who have never been in a situation where I think so many people were on their same level intellectually as well, they're not used to being challenged on some level. And so that breeds very interesting interactions between people, right? Do you agree?
I do. I mean, it's funny because I think one way that I hate that this is going to be another tangent. One way that I am misunderstood is that I'm very overconfident, right? Like I speak very confidently about things. But the funny thing is I was not the top of my class as an undergrad. I was not the smartest person in the room ever when I was in my undergrad classes. I didn't ace my undergrad classes at all. I just was very passionate about the subject. Whereas there are people, indeed, like Nina is saying, it's like they come from a place where they really haven't really met a challenge necessarily. I just have this delusional confidence that people don't realize is delusional until they like get to know me. But yes,
Delulu is the Salulu, as they say.
Delulu is the Salulu. And I know it's kind of, as I discussed in the QE process episode, like part of my process is to be kind of delusional. Part of my like way of dealing with things is to kind of be delusional until otherwise, until I have to confront my own failings, as they say.
Yeah.
But yeah. Okay. But not to
but
go
also
into that
to be clear, I wasn't like top of my class either. Just to be completely transparent with everybody. I did get the highest score on one organic chemistry exam.
Yeah.
But that was like my claim to fame for all of undergrad.
If anything, like, yeah, we can talk about our mentality in first year later. But basically, conflict resolution, it's like, for me, I think I shy away from a lot of the interpersonal conflict resolution because there's also this saying that I was raised with in Chinese, which is like, 大事化小，小事化了, which just means that if you ever encounter a big problem, try to make it small. And then once you make it small, you can actually get rid of the problem. And so for me, it's always like, whenever I encounter a problem, I'm always thinking of this downward like trajectory of this problem until it goes away. And so when I see big problems, that's where the mediation comes in. Cause I'm like, maybe if I can mediate this conflict into a small enough conflict, we can just like get over it as as a philosophy. And so interpersonal conflicts are the worst. And I just feel like sometimes my preference is for them to not be a conflict at all.
Which was very interesting for when we got into our fight because I was very confrontational and she just kept on. Because what she'll do is to make it small, she'll take the blame.
Yes.
Instead of like, and I didn't want that because that was part of like we're not going to get into our disagreement. We can talk about how we resolved our conflict a little bit, but like I was so angry at certain things and it wasn't at her. It was at her taking the blame for things. And then when I was angry at her, she would just like continue taking the blame for things. And I'd be like, no, that's what I'm mad about.
Right. I think that's my general response. Like when somebody brings up a conflict to me, I very quickly will step up and number one, take ownership for what I think my part was in the conflict. And then oftentimes I probably take a little too much ownership and then, hope that that gives the other person a reason to also state what they may have done wrong. And then I'm hoping that that's our avenue for both of us to step down from wherever we're, I'll take the first step is basically what I'm saying. But the problem is sometimes the other person's not going to take like that. Sometimes the other person's not going to see that and say, oh, I'll also take a step down. Sometimes the other person takes a step forward. And while you're stepping down,
a step forwarder.
No, I actually think with you, it's a little bit, because the thing is like, if somebody else is going to step further, it forces me back. It doesn't give me any room to go that way. You know what I'm saying? Like if you think about conflict as like a straight line and it's like a tug of war, it's like if somebody's giving you slack, you should pull back. You should also give the other person some slack.
That's not how tug of war works, dude.
No, you're right. Tug of war is a really bad analogy. But if you think of conflict as a straight line and you two are facing each other and you're walking towards one another and there's no way to sidestep, okay? If the other person gives you room and you just keep going forward, like where do you think the other person's going to go? You force them into a corner. Sometimes that's being cognizant of that, I think is really important. Like, that's why when I think of conflict, I think of it as kind of like a dance and when I'm resolving it, because sometimes it's correct for you to inch forward, but sometimes you do need to go back and take a step back. You can't just go in one direction. If you go in one direction the entire time, I think it becomes unbalanced.
Yeah. And I think with that, what we did, our taking a step back was literally like deciding that we weren't going to talk about it anymore. Like we weren't going to fight anymore. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then ultimately not be friends anymore.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
And that in itself is a really good way of conflict resolution. In my opinion, it did resolve our conflict because we had argued, like our fight, we kept fighting about it. We fought about it for months. It was all we could ever talk about. And then that's like no way to have a friendship. And so we got ourselves to a point where the only way to resolve it was to actually just completely stop talking about it so that we both could like separately deal with however we were feeling and then come back together again. So that's one way to navigate that as well.
Yeah. I mean, because with us, like it was at the point where communication was necessary, but we were both too emotional about it to have a good conversation about it. So we needed a year of separation, pandemic-induced separation, to allow us to start talking about it where we had both recognized our own wrongs, really.
Right.
Because that's the other thing is that I believe that there is not a single conflict that is just one person. It is always both people. And for me, like when we were in our conflict, I was just like so mad at you. I could not even see what I was possibly doing wrong in that situation to you. And then I realized I was like, yeah, I was kind of being mean. I was kind of being way too mean about that. But
yeah, for me, my process was being in that fight with you, being actively fighting with you. I could only think of the ways that I was fucking up and that I didn't like do things correctly. And my learning process, like the reason why I need to step away is because I needed the space to think about the other side of that, like how you were impacting me, how you were like, I hadn't had the space or the mental energy to think about that. So because you were my friend, I couldn't let myself be upset at my friend, if that makes sense. So I needed to stop being friends with you so that I could be upset at you. Yeah. Which was what I desperately needed to counteract feeling shitty about myself, is I needed to realize why I was upset at you so that I could work through it. You have to identify the problem before you can work through it.
And then when I realized that you were mad at me too, that was when I was like, oh, okay, this makes sense why we never resolved it, because we were two angry people talking right past each other. And like, whereas I felt like, okay, I'm angry, like, but I'm mad. Like, why are we not like, what do you mean you're mad too? And then I was like, oh, that makes sense. And then finally we dealt with it.
I mean, I think that in our case, we are a good example of like two people who worked together who ultimately ended up having a fight and then continued to work together in, I think, a like decently professional way. We got a lot of the projects that we were working on done. We like, yeah, it was a struggle and it wasn't always easy, but we made it through because I think Nina and I both knew that the most important thing was our job. Like we still had a job to do, and people relied on us to finish those jobs. So we did it.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree. Like, and that's the important thing about thinking about this in context of graduate school and anything in your professional career is that you usually, you can't let conflict get in the way of you getting your work done. And if conflict is getting in the way of you getting your work done, that's when you need to either work with the person who you're having conflict with, or if you work at a place that has HR, then you go to HR. If you work in a lab, you may want to go to your PI. They receive more training about conflict resolution than we do as graduate students, and they can direct you to the right types of people.
Like that's when you need an intervention, like, or some kind of intervening force. If you can't resolve the conflict, definitely try to resolve it just the two of you. But if you feel like it's impossible to, and you've tried everything possible to resolve it, then it's appropriate to find something else to help intervene in the conflict. Recognizing that, you need help with it is really important too. Like an example of this is when Nina and I were at the peak of our fighting, I felt like it was really impacting my productivity and my ability to go in every day because we were in the same room. I saw her everywhere. It's really hard. And the nice thing about my graduate school experience and its flexibility, it's that our lab was actually partitioned into different rooms. So I went to my advisor. I said, I'm having this issue. It's impacting my productivity. And he felt like it would be okay for me to switch rooms or move rooms so that I didn't have to deal with it anymore, which I really appreciated. I'm not saying everybody will have an advisor or a circumstance that would allow that to happen, but that's an example of me essentially asking for help. And that was that was ultimately, I think, a good move. I ended up moving.
I think so too.
That created, more distance, and it allowed us to continue to do our work.
Yeah, that was because we had I feel like we had mutually been like, yeah, this is probably for the best. You should probably not.
It was not a surprise. I didn't do it, I think,
you didn't go behind my back and go, we were like, this something's got to give. Because at the time, picture, our desks were next to each other. Our fume hoods were next to each other. And even when we were fighting, we sat next to each other in group meeting. Yeah. Too. We had sat next to each other for 4 years at that point.
Right. And if you have ever been to a group meeting in a large group, even though there's no assigned seating, there's kind of assigned seating in the sense that everybody kind of sits in the same place anyway. So we have always sat next to each other. We did our best to get through that time without, I think, having too much friction. Because if the other thing is, the other way of approaching it with your advisors, if you're having conflict with somebody in the lab, is to be like, listen, if things continue as they are, your negative dynamic could potentially impact the rest of the group.
Which, to be fair, ours did.
Right. Fair. But to be fair, also, we tried, and we were cognizant of this, and we did our best to minimize the impact it had on the group.
Agreed.
The best we could. That's all you can really do.
I agree.
But certainly you can make a case for moving or switching projects or anything if you feel like it impacts the rest of the group.
Yeah, I think both of us too. One of the things that was really sad for us is that we never wanted to be people that made things less comfortable for other people, because whenever we talked to other graduate students to join our lab, it was always because our lab was so much fun and we got along really well and everyone was getting along really well. And then all of a sudden we weren't. And so I felt really guilty about that because I almost feel like we tricked them at the time.
I also struggled with the guilt, right? But at a certain point, it was the balance of I can be that for you guys, or I can take care of myself. And I'm very accustomed. Part of the reason why it took us so long to fight was because we were thinking of that. None of us wanted to, stop being friends. But if we had decided to stop being friends sooner, maybe we would have maybe it would have been a shorter negative period of time. Who knows?
Who's to say?
Who's to say? So like, it's hard to say, and it's also like, wow, is it kind of narcissistic of us? I know it's realistic in our case, but it is kind of narcissistic to be like, and self-important to be like, oh, we're the ones who dictate the social dynamics of the lab.
Yeah, that's fair. It's super fair. So there's misunderstandings, and then there's also complete disagreements, right?
Yeah. I was going to segue into that as well. Like, let's talk about the complete disagreements. I mean, some of the lessons are, I think, self-explanatory. Like, if you have a complete disagreement with somebody, trying to think of like why you guys have that disagreement, empathize with them, putting yourself in their shoes to kind of be like, where are they coming from? Why would that cause them to see the situation differently than me?
Yes.
That's still really important here. As scientists, we're all smart. We all, I think, have knowledge. We all have something to bring to the table. If you have a really big disagreement with somebody and you're coming from two different places, start from the empathy.
That's like the whole idea of giving people the benefit of the doubt. We talk about this a lot because this is something that I learned a lot from Anna, which is giving people the benefit of the doubt. Because I think that a lot of times, kind of like what I was saying earlier, that, people go into grad school and they're used to being right and they want to be right.
Everybody wants to be right. Everybody loves feeling right.
And everybody, like, I don't want to say everybody, like, I don't want to hyperbolize this, but you judge people a lot too. Like, people are really judgmental in graduate school. And I think that part of that is because of all of the competition. Like, a lot of people are a little bit selfish in graduate school because you are the one getting your degree. So everyone's like, this is my PhD and I'm going to do what I need to do to make sure that I get everything that I want out of my PhD. And that can take a toll on other people if, your coworkers are not caring about you because they're caring so much about themselves, right? And then that also causes you to judge people. So you'll judge the people around you and be like, oh, well, this person got this, but like, I don't think they deserve that. Or, I deserve this more than this person. And as a result, like, of people being so judgmental, I think people fail to give people the benefit of the doubt. They fail to look at their colleagues and say like, wow, this person is actually, they're going through a lot right now. They're doing the best they can. And I think a lot of conflict resolution, especially in this, like, we've called it a pressure cooker of a situation that is graduate school. It's about like looking at everybody and saying, you're human. I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt that you are doing the best that you can. I remember there was this girl in another lab who was dating someone else in our program. And she was like, yeah, my boyfriend thinks that all of his coworkers are robots and forgets that they're human sometimes. Like, outside of lab, they are human, but in lab, they're like, well, why are you not performing efficiently like a robot would? And I think that's a really important point.
That's huge. That's super huge. That's going to apply in anything. It's just kind of like, you can't expect, I think we have different expectations in lab for one another now because it's like, because the pressure to do research is really high. So like, if somebody, like, let's say somebody made an honest mistake and as a result, that's going to delay an experiment that you wanted to run, like, you're going to take that kind of personally in the moment because you're like, fuck, like, my life, like, I need to get this done, but without thinking about the fact that that other person didn't intentionally make that mistake, right? That other person's not intentionally out to get you. They just, they had other stuff going on. Who is to say?
I mean, I know I was guilty of that, like, just being so irrationally angry that somebody made a mistake. Forgetting that people are allowed to make mistakes. It's natural to make mistakes,
especially in grad school. Like, if we all think about it, we all know how hard and challenging and how many different roles in grad school you have to juggle and stuff. So like, it shouldn't be shocking to any of us that somebody else drops the ball on something because we're also just like struggling, right? We're also just hanging on by a thread. So like, it's going to happen. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. So
it's true.
That's empathy. The other thing about disagreements in terms of like you both coming from different perspectives is like that, the advice I want to reiterate is just kind of like, you don't have to be right all the time. Your feelings don't need to be expressed. Like, if you disagree with somebody, you don't have to have that conversation with that person all the time. Why? You know what I'm saying? Like, if you think you're right about something and the other person's wrong, you don't need to point it out.
Unless it's, you know, gonna cause like catastrophic failure, then like for sure. Right. But if it's just like, if it's not your business or like not your problem,
or if it's not going to impact you.
Yeah.
Who cares? Who cares that they feel differently than you about it? You know, that's like picking your battles. You want to pick the battles that like is really ultimately going to impact you.
Yeah.
But I'll just give a brief example about the judgment thing, because I think this relates to us. I remember when we were in lab, we had a conversation about this, and I was not being as like good about my opinions, keeping my opinions to myself. But you and our colleague got into a conversation about leaving money for future children. You were like, how are we going to leave? Like, how are we going, like, if we have children, we have to plan on leaving money for them or giving them something once we depart. And I remember, and you and him were having this conversation. And then I walked in and you were like, you came to ask me about it because it was a discussion. And you're like, what do you think? Are you going to like, don't you want to leave money for your kids? And I remember just going, no, why would I want to do that?
Yeah. This was also when we were not friends. We were not friends. We were not friends, but I always would tell people we're cool. Like, we're cool now.
Yeah. In the sense that we can like, where we had a conversations. We had a working relationship. We weren't like, you know, openly hostile to one another. We were just kind of like living around one another. And so you asked me about this.
We were never openly hostile to each other, just to be clear. But
just to be clear. But yeah, you asked about that. And I think that you're the kind of personality, I feel like, I think you've grown out of it, that you get really shook when other people don't have the same like point of view as you. I think you get shook because you're like, how could you not? Because I remember you being so startled and I was
startled
that I was like, I don't really feel like it's that important to leave money to your kids. Like that.
Yeah.
Why would you make that a priority? I mean, if you can, great. But if you can't, like, I thought the whole point is that we raise our kids to be self-sufficient and to make money on their own. Like, hopefully by the time this becomes a problem, they're going to be adults and they're going to be able to take care of themselves. And I
remember that.
I'm a very anti trust fund baby mentality. Like, I'm like, okay, I'm not in the sense that I don't like trust fund babies, but I'm like, is that a goal that you should have in life? How important of a goal is that? Because, and I think part of it is also that I got by, like, so why wouldn't my kid? You know, I don't have money waiting for me. Why would my kid need it? Like, so I was very like, I also just feel like sometimes, well, let's just put it this way. I think the Roosevelts or the Carnegies, one of those big families, one of those really rich American families, I remember hearing in history class that the patriarch of those families donated all of their money to charity and did not leave any money for his kids, even though he had a lot of money, because he was like, my kids don't need it. Like, why would my kids need it? And I love that. Why are we planning for that? That makes no sense to me.
Yeah. I think what's really interesting about that, and this is like, I think this could be a conversation for another podcast, but I'll just share it anyway. One of the really cool things about graduate school is that because it is a funded program, typically, like at least in the STEM fields, it does allow for a lot more socioeconomic diversity than I think other programs that cost a ton of money do. And I think that, you know, I grew up in a, you know, upper middle class family in San Diego. So Anna and I came from very different socioeconomic statuses. And so I learned a lot in grad school about
poor people. No.
But I mean, you know, like we always have, you know, I've learned a lot from her. She's learned a lot from me. And that has been very valuable, I think, for both of us. But I think that was the reason I was so startled, was because for me, I feel like that's what I had kind of situation I had grown up in. And that's not the situation that you grew up in. So for me, I was like, oh, I could not even imagine not growing up in that situation. But like,
so I think this is a good example of why two people might disagree about something,
Yeah.
right? Like, this is a great example of how our backgrounds made it so that like we completely have different perspectives on how to raise our kids. And I mean, like, or how like what to do with our theoretical children or whatever.
Mhm.
And like Nina, I think I remember at the time, like, I remember how shocked she was. And at the time, because she and I were not in good footing, like we were still kind of like cold towards one another and we were like not friends. I remember just being really judgmental about it and being like, I can't believe she wants to leave money to her kids. Like, that's such a waste of money. And that's like, and that's just going to spoil her children. And I just remember thinking like, that sucks. Like, why would she want to do that? Like, that's such a stupid thing to want to do. And obviously now, like with a more like nuanced way of looking at it, like not just because you and I are friends, but like if I were looking at it more open-mindedly, I'd be like, well, I mean, first of all, if it's her money, she can do whatever she wants with her own money.
Mhm.
Second of all, if it's her kids, she should do whatever she wants with her own kids. But at the same time, like, you know, why am I faulting a person for just wanting to take care of her children? I don't know.
Theoretical children. Yeah.
Her theoretical children. Like, I don't know. But so like, I mean, I think I just want to bring this back to kind of conflict, disagreements and stuff like that. Like those things will happen in grad school and in life because you meet people from different walks of life and you don't like, even Nina, like, you know, if you don't know the other person you're talking to, you don't know where they're coming from. Like in the beginning, she and I didn't know much about each other's backgrounds. Like we didn't know about our socioeconomic differences. Like, so we all just had these different ideas and you're always trying to find common ground with people. But when there's like this huge, like kind of different world perspectives, it's really shocking sometimes. You're like, what?
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, and it goes both ways, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. I've had to work really hard in thinking about, well, actually it doesn't. And I tell you why.
Oh.
Poor people always think about rich people and think about what it's like to be rich, but rich people do not spend a minute thinking about what it's like to be poor. And I mean, I know that's a very general statement, but I think I borrowed that from a comedian or something because that's like, you know, the way of the world is you're always thinking about what it would be like to have more money. But for the most part, you're not thinking about what it's like to have less money. Okay. Like, or you spend less time thinking about what it's like to have less money. And that's why there is a divide between the classes.
Well, and that's actually funny. That's not funny, but like what's funny is but another disagreement that we had was like when I would be stressed about money, you would be like, why the fuck are you stressed right now? But that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, but it's like a very similar. I mean, we could talk about socioeconomic. We'll talk. Listen, we'll revisit this topic in another. We'll talk about what it's like.
Yeah, growing up in anyway.
I would say that nobody in life is 100% right 100% of the time. So if you're really firm on being right, consider time, place, context. Oh, the other thing I wanted to bring up in this part of the podcast was just like, if you truly do think that you're right about something and the other person's wrong, the place is really important in which you point that out. You know, there's context is everything. In conflict resolution, there's no difference. You can either confront this person in a group setting, or you can do it in a one-on-one setting. I always prefer to do it in a one-on-one setting because you don't need to have arguing with somebody in front of other people, not the play.
You don't need an audience. You don't
need an audience. That person doesn't need an audience. And it's harder if you do think the other person's wrong, you're making it harder for them to admit that they're wrong when you bring other people involved or when you involve other people. If you want to set up a situation where you want to persuade someone that you're right about something, always do it in a one-on-one setting. It's much easier for another person to step down when there aren't other people around and they have to worry about judgment, you know, or you have to worry about judgment. That's not good too.
Well, and I think even further than that, I think being okay with people having different opinions is important. And I think that there are some times where you don't need to accept that, right? Like when somebody's opinion is directly antithetical to your existence as an individual, okay, at that point, like that's fine. You don't need to even entertain somebody who doesn't believe that you have the right to exist in any way, shape, or form. Okay. That's not what we're talking about here. But having a conversation with somebody and agreeing to disagree is okay. You don't need to convince everybody to agree with you. I'm still going to leave my children money if I have the luxury of doing so.
And I'm not. Anyway, the point is, I think we can close the chapter on disagreements for now and go further. Consider this. Somebody else disagreeing with how you feel doesn't invalidate how you feel.
And even further, I think like obviously one of the things that we've said a lot is that, Anna and I argue all the time. Okay. We argue about everything and we disagree all the time. But that is the beauty of our friendship, because as a result, we are open to one another and we are open to learning from one another. And that makes it easier to interact with the rest of the world, right? Because it makes you realize that not everybody with an opposite opinion to yours is evil, which I think is the vibe that people kind of go into. If like people disagree with you, people are like, I cannot believe that they disagree with me.
That speaks to me. That really does. I agree. I super agree with that. I feel like we tend to villainize people a lot in our lives because we're all kind of narcissistic and we all have a self-character, like the main character syndrome in us. We tend to villainize people who don't think about things the same way we do. And that's just like, we need to stop doing that. Because more often than not, there are going to be people around you who don't feel the exact same way as you. And I'm so fortunate to have a really good friend like Nina who disagrees with me about things. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, it gives you better perspective on and it just gives you more empathy. Like, I'm not saying that I wasn't empathetic before Anna and I became friends and started fighting all the time, but it certainly has helped. Okay.
You got to see it to believe it.
Yeah. Exactly. But anyway, I feel like we should round this out with how did we make up? How did we become friends again? What was our resolution?
It wasn't easy. It was certainly not easy. I think the biggest influence was Nina's wedding. And we'll talk about the different stages, but in general, like when she got engaged, I feel like that changed everything, or that initiated the change in everything. We had our year to cool off. We had like a lot of time. We had a year and a pandemic to essentially distance ourselves from one another and get some space. And then she was going to graduate. And I remember she had just gotten engaged in Mexico. And we were doing a congrats, Nina, for graduating kind of group event. And we were at a bar and I obviously had to go.
Yeah, she had to go. And we both love Grey's Anatomy. And so we've always said, I'm Meredith and she's Christina. That's who we are. We're each other's person, if you will. We had not really been friends at this point. We are friendly. We had taken a picture together at the previous person's going away party. I don't know if you remember that, but I still have those photos. But I'll send them to you. But like we were cool enough to choose to take a photo together. And then I'm engaged. I'm telling everybody, yeah, we got engaged, whatever. And then Anna and I go to the bar together and she looks at me and she goes, do you remember that Grey's Anatomy episode where Christina and Meredith get into a fight? And then Christina's just like, we don't need to talk about this. Let's just drink tequila.
And that's how they made up.
They didn't talk about it. They just drank tequila together. So she's looking at me. She's like, do you remember that? And then we ordered 2 shots of tequila and we take a shot of tequila together and the rest is history.
And then she cried.
Actually, that's not true. And then
that's not true. That's not true. Wait. So that was my initial, like, that's how I initiated, I think, trying to make up with you, because I was like, I don't want to talk about it anymore. Let's just be friends, is the moral of the scene in Grey's Anatomy that I was referencing, is that they just were like, let's not be bitches and cry about it. And have a whole moment and make a big stink of everything. Let's just like get over it, And then I feel like you were receptive to that, and she was already a few drinks in. So maybe she was a little too I was worried that maybe she was a little too drunk to be receptive to it. Cause then after that, I think you kind of broke down a little bit and what did you say to me?
So then, well, she's like gonna leave. Okay. She's like leaving for the night. And I'm like so emotional. Okay. I'm engaged. I'm graduating. I'm leaving this. Like, I loved my time at UC Davis. This was like a huge deal.
It was an end of an era.
It was the end of an era. And like Anna was a huge part of that era for me. And so she's leaving, saying goodbye. And then I start crying. And I was like, I just can't imagine getting married without you standing up there with me. And she literally looks at me and she's like, hey, I think you might be a little bit drunk, but if you still feel that way tomorrow, let me know.
I was being really diplomatic about it, I feel like.
She was. But then it was so funny because so we decided we were gonna be friends again, basically. But it was so awkward because we hadn't been friends for a year and a half. So she starts we start texting again or messaging each other. And we only
we need to look back at that era of texting because we haven't, and it's going to be the most awkward exchanges because she and I were being so careful in the early days. Here's the thing, guys. You have to understand, this is what happened. To summarize, I bring up the Grey's Anatomy scene. That's my step back. Okay, that's me. Remember when I was talking about two people in conflict facing each other? That was me saying I'm going to take a step back from the conflict. Okay, this is my white flag. I'm waving it. And then she was like, okay, I'm ready. I'm meeting this. I'm going to meet this with saying, I need you to be at my wedding. Okay. And that's her little white flag. And that's how we ended the night. So then the next day we actually had to figure out how we were going to fucking execute it. Okay. We had
how we're going to be friends.
How we were going to execute what we agreed upon. That was that was going to be a hard thing to do. And and long story short, it didn't happen right away. I don't think we became as close as we were before the breakup right away, but we knew we needed to get there because I was going to be at her wedding and I couldn't,
she was going to be a bridesmaid.
Be awkward. Yes. I was going to be a bridesmaid and I couldn't just be awkward. At the bachelorette, at the bridal shower? We needed to get there. So we both, I don't know, put in some effort and got there.
Anna put more effort in.
We communicated a lot because I knew we were being awkward. So I confronted her one day and I was like, so I think you're not ready for it. And that's okay. And I'm probably not ready for it either. I remember because we communicated about that. We had that conversation where I was like, listen, I have a feeling that you want certain things. You want me to be a bridesmaid at your wedding. This is true, but you're not ready to be at that level right away. Yeah. Because it was she had a year or so to plan her wedding. So we had a year of time to essentially get there. So we moseyed along. And the first 2 months we were both kind of I remember hanging out with her at one of my friends' birthday parties in San Francisco while she was doing her postdoc. I remember seeing her. Remember our coffee? Remember when we had to hang out one-on-one for the first time?
We invited Crystal.
That? And we couldn't. We were so nervous. Our first one-on-one hangout. Okay. We were so nervous. We had to invite a third party to buffer it.
That was so funny. I forgot about that.
Crystal, if you're listening, DM us.
That was so funny. Oh my God. Oh God, that's so funny. Well, because it's awkward when you
It's awkward.
It's so awkward to be so close with somebody and then you don't talk for a year. What happened? She had new friends. I had new friends. I was like, who's Josiah? Who is this person that you're who are you watching scary movies with?
Who the fuck is that? Yeah, no, because we were the way that Nina and I were best friends, we lived our lives
as one.
We were one brain cell. We were truly one brain cell. Now we're two brain cells. We are now two brain cells that have learned to coexist.
No, we're two brain cells. And at the time, to really paint the picture of how close we were, Like we were attached at the hip. Everybody was like, if they wanted to know about me, they would ask about Anna. If they wanted to know about Anna, they would ask me. Like it was constant, like our qualifying exams at parties. If I was there and she wasn't, it'd be like, oh, where's Anna? And then like somebody would ask her, oh, where's Nina? Like we were very much known to be best friends. And
we were a pair. We were a pair. We came as a set. You couldn't get one without the other. When we were best friends. And that was the kind of situation. And it was like, looking back at it, the reason why I say we were one brain cell is because it was kind of codependent. It was like definitely a little, maybe too codependent, some would say. And I think we've gotten to a healthier place right now. After our breakup, our friendship is stronger. That's the crazy part. Is that even though it was awkward and we went through that like weird phase where we couldn't hang out one-on-one with each other without Crystal present, we are now stronger than we were before. I mean, a few months after your wedding, we decided to do a podcast.
Whoa, that was only a year after we started to be friends again.
Wow, exactly.
That's crazy.
So we got to a point where now, like, we're not stupid either. We didn't just get into this when we were like awkward, like we thought about it. We made a calculated decision. We were like, no, we're strong enough that we can do a podcast and not hate each other.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Like that's the whole thing. Sometimes, like, I don't know, our break made us stronger, and I stand by that.
Well, and that's like what I said. Call back to what we were saying earlier, and from the book that I was talking about, the Getting to Yes, conflict allows for growth. And I think that we needed that space because I think we were stagnating each other at the time. And I think that we needed the space to grow individually to create two brain cells. That's what has allowed us to now have the friendship that we have now. I think it's very important. So moral of the story is, so this is a little bit about our friendship, but also conflict resolution. The moral of the story is that communication is absolutely key. And also communicating to understand, not communicating to be right. Like, try to understand the people around you. Take the effort to learn about people who come from different backgrounds as you and try to understand why they feel the way that they do. It's really important. And
you should not make assumptions, and you should talk, and you should arrive at a conclusion after actually talking with these people and stuff. But it does take an inquisitive mind to even start. You know, you should ask yourself why somebody else is behaving a certain way. And then even better, if you can initiate a good conversation with them about it, you might actually, find a productive way to resolve something that you're feeling about the other person, whether it's conflict or anything else.
Anna and I are millennials, and I do apologize for that. Like, we can't help when we were born, and as a result, we both have been Harry Potter nerds for our life. We don't like J.K. Rowling, or however you say her name, because she's a TERF. But there is a really good quote from Dumbledore that I think is a good kind of ender to this. I don't know if you remember this. I was all about Dumbledore quotes when I was reading.
You really were.
I was. So anyway, we're Harry Potter nerds. I've tried to separate myself from it a little bit just because like J.K. Rowling is a TERF, but at the same time, like some of the shit she said was good. So I'm just going to share this Dumbledore quote that I think is very useful. And it's, differences of habit and language are nothing at all if our aims are identical and our hearts are open.
Aww. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Basically Doctors, where Nina and I talk about fights and resolutions, sometimes together, sometimes apart. Remember to like, comment, or subscribe if you feel so inclined to support the podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.
Bye.